In a small village far away from the noisy cities and fast-moving life, there was a group of people known simply as the Elders. They were not just old people, they were the keepers of stories and wisdom. Every week, without fail, they met in a small wooden hall near the center of the village. The hall was simple, with wooden benches and walls decorated with old pictures and symbols from the past. The Elders sat together and spoke quietly, sharing memories and lessons learned from many years of living. The village around them was peaceful. Most people were farmers or craftsmen, working the land and making things with their hands. The village was surrounded by green hills and tall trees. The air was fresh and the sky was often clear and blue. Life was slow, and that's how the villagers liked it. They didn't want to rush or change too much. But the Elders knew something that others did not. They had seen signs and heard stories passed down from their grandparents, who had heard them from their grandparents. These stories were not just about the past, they were warnings for the future. One story in particular stayed in the hearts of the Elders. It was a story about humans, about the incredible power people had and the danger that came with it. The Elders believed that humans were unstoppable, not because they were cruel or careless, but because they had a will that could never be broken. They could create amazing things and solve hard problems. But that power, if used without care, could hurt the world around them. The Elders often spoke about this power and its cost, but most of the villagers did not understand. To them, the Elders were just old people telling old stories, nice tales maybe, but nothing real or urgent. "We live in a changing world," the villagers would say, "and we must move forward." They believed the future was bright, full of new machines, better crops, and faster ways to live. The Elders' warning seemed like fear of change or sadness for the past. But the Elders felt something deeper. They knew the truth even if no one else wanted to hear it. They saw how the world was slowly shifting, how the forests around the village were getting smaller, and how the weather was becoming strange. Winters that used to be cold were now mild. Rain came at strange times, sometimes too much, sometimes too little. The animals in the forest were changing too. Some that were once common were disappearing, and new ones appeared that the Elders had never seen. One evening, as the sun was setting, the Elders gathered again in the wooden hall. The room was quiet except for the soft creak of the wooden floor and the low voices of the Elders. They spoke of the signs they had seen recently. One elder, who had spent much of his life watching the sky, told the group about strange lights he had seen far above the trees. They weren't stars or airplanes, he said, but something new and unusual. Another elder spoke about the river that ran near the village. It had been clear and full of fish, but lately it looked muddy and quiet. "The fish were gone. We must speak," said one elder, her voice steady but serious. "We must warn the village. The world is changing in ways that will not stop." But when the Elders tried to tell the others, their words did not carry the weight they hoped. Some villagers smiled kindly, listening politely but not truly believing. Others laughed softly, saying the Elders were too worried, too old-fashioned. "We are fine," they said. "Life always changes, but we adapt. There is no need to fear." This made the Elders sad. They knew their message was important. They wanted to help the village prepare for what was coming. But how could they make people listen when no one believed? One elder, who was quieter than the others, looked out of the window at the trees outside. "Humans are unstoppable," he said softly. "Our power grows every day. We create machines, build cities, change the land. This is our strength. But strength without wisdom is dangerous." The others nodded. They remembered the old story again, the one about humans being unstoppable. It was not just about power or strength. It was about the way humans never gave up. When they faced problems, they spoke. They worked together and they found new ways to survive and grow. This was true for the village, for the country, and for the whole world. But the Elders worried that this unstoppable nature might soon cause great harm if people did not change how they lived. Outside the hall, the village carried on. Children played in the fields, farmers tended their crops, and neighbors greeted each other warmly. No one knew that the Elders were trying to sound a warning about the future. One afternoon, a young person from the village approached the hall. They had heard the Elders talking and were curious. The young person sat quietly and listened. For the first time, they heard the story in a new way. The Elders spoke of balance, how humans were part of the world, not above it. They spoke of respect for nature and for each other. The young person began to understand that the Elders were not just telling old stories. They were sharing important truths. After the meeting, the young person asked the elders questions. How can we listen to this warning? What can we do? The world outside the village is changing fast. How do we stop the bad things from happening? The elders smiled gently. They didn't have all the answers, but they believed that change started with listening. We must speak and keep speaking, one elder said. We must care for the land, for the water, for the air. We must remember that humans are strong, but not above the world. We live with it, not apart from it. The young person left the hall feeling both hopeful and worried. Hopeful because the elders cared deeply. Worried because they knew it would be hard to change how the village and the world thought about progress and power. Days turned into weeks, and the village slowly started to notice small changes. Some animals returned, some plants grew in new places, and the river seemed clearer after a heavy rain. But the bigger changes outside the village continued. Cities grew taller, machines worked faster, and the news spoke of new inventions and discoveries. Still, the elders kept their meetings. They kept telling the story of humans as an unstoppable force. They reminded each other that their role was not just to remember the past, but to prepare for the future. Even if no one else believed, the elders believed. One night, under a sky full of stars, the elders sat around a small fire outside the hall. They spoke quietly, sharing their hopes and fears. They talked about what it meant to be human, how people had the power to create and to destroy. They hoped that someday others would listen. They hoped that the unstoppable power of humans could be guided by care, respect, and wisdom. The village slept peacefully, unaware of the deep truths held by the elders. But the elders knew the truth was growing stronger, like a seed waiting to bloom. They understood that humans were unstoppable, and that this power could change the world for better or worse. And so the elders waited, watching the skies, the forests, and the people around them. They spoke even when no one believed, because some truths must always be spoken. The story was only just beginning. The world around the village was changing faster than anyone expected. At first, the changes were small, almost easy to ignore. But as time passed, those small signs began to grow into something more worrying. The elders had been right to feel uneasy. The village itself was peaceful, but the land and sky told a different story. People in the village started noticing strange things that didn't fit the old rhythms of life. The river, which had always been clear and full of fish, now looked different. It ran slower, and its water wasn't as clean as before. The fish that once swam freely seemed to have vanished. Some villagers tried to catch fish one day and came back empty-handed. They looked at the river with confusion and worry, but didn't know what to do. The trees around the village, which used to be thick and green, were losing their leaves early. Some trees seemed sick with dry branches and cracked bark. The birds that sang in the mornings were quieter. Their songs were fewer and softer, as if the forest itself was tired. The elders noticed these signs too and shared them during their meetings, hoping that others would understand the meaning behind these changes. One morning, a group of farmers gathered near the edge of the forest. They had planned to clear some trees to make more space for crops. They were excited about planting more seeds and growing more food, hoping for a better harvest than last year. But as they started to work, they noticed the soil was not as healthy as it had been before. It was dry and crumbly in some places, and in others it felt hard like stone. The plants they tried to grow there didn't look strong. Some withered quickly, unable to grow tall or bear fruit. The farmers looked to the elders for advice, but the elders could only shake their heads with sadness. The land is changing, they said softly. We must be careful with how we use it. If we take too much without giving back, the earth will grow tired. But the farmers were hopeful. They believed in progress and in working hard. They wanted to provide for their families in the village. They thought the elders were too cautious, stuck in old ways. We have always worked this way, some said. We will find new ways to fix the soil, to grow better crops. The earth will heal. As the days passed, the weather itself started to behave strangely. The seasons were not as clear as before. Winters were warmer and shorter. Sometimes it would rain heavily for days, washing away topsoil and damaging homes. Other times there was little rain at all and the fields cracked under the sun. The villagers felt caught in confusion. They talked among themselves, wondering if this was just a passing phase or a sign of something bigger. The elders watched these changes with deep concern. They remembered stories from long ago about times when the world was not in balance. Their ancestors had spoken of cycles of life, where the earth gave and took, where humans lived in harmony with nature. Now it seemed those cycles were breaking. One evening, during their weekly gathering, the elders spoke quietly but urgently. They shared what they had seen and heard from the land and sky. One elder, who had spent years watching the stars, told the group about strange lights he had seen far above the trees. These lights moved differently than stars or airplanes. They were brighter, and sometimes they seemed to pulse or change color. "Something new is coming," he said. "Something we have never seen before." Others nodded, sharing their own observations. The river's slow flow, the sick trees, the quiet birds, all signs pointing to a world that was changing too fast for its own good. "We have warned before," one elder said, "but now the signs are growing stronger. We must tell the village again. We must speak louder." But the villagers were busy with their daily lives. Many had begun to leave the village to seek work in the city or to find better opportunities. They were drawn by the promise of new technology, machines, and faster ways of living. The old stories of the elders seemed less important compared to the chance for a better future. When the elders tried to warn them, many simply smiled politely or shook their heads. "You worry too much," they said. "The world has always changed. We will find a way." Some even laughed gently, thinking the elders were afraid of progress. They believed that the new machines and inventions would solve any problem. But the elders knew it was not that simple. The power humans had gained was real, but it needed care and respect. Without that, the power could become dangerous, even unstoppable in the worst way. A young person from the village, curious and thoughtful, began to listen carefully to the elders. This young person had grown up hearing the stories but had never truly understood them. Now, seeing the changes in the river and the trees, the young person started to ask questions. Why was the river drying? Why were the birds disappearing? What could be done? The elders welcomed these questions. They explained that humans were powerful because they could speak and work together. But this power came with responsibility. "We are part of the earth," one elder said, "not above it. We must live with respect, not control." The young person began to see the elders not as old storytellers, but as people with deep knowledge and care. This gave hope that maybe the village could still listen and change. Outside the village, the world was moving even faster. Cities grew larger, machines worked day and night, and people depended more on technology. News from outside spoke of amazing inventions. Cars that could drive themselves, machines that could think, medicines that could cure diseases faster than ever before. It all seemed exciting and hopeful, but the elders knew that not all change was good. They worried that the rush for progress was forgetting something important, the balance between humans and the earth. When that balance was lost, both could suffer. In the village, some people began to notice more problems. The air sometimes smelled different, not fresh like before. Some plants that once grew everywhere were harder to find. Animals that were common in the forest were quieter or simply gone. The elders kept meeting, sharing what they saw and felt. They spoke of patience and care. They told the story again, the story of humans as an unstoppable force able to create and destroy. This was not a story to fear, but one to understand. They believed that if the villagers could listen, they could use their power for good. They could find ways to protect the river, heal the soil, and bring back the birds. It would not be easy. It would take time and effort. But it was possible. One night, under a sky full of stars, the elders sat together and shared their hopes. They spoke of a future where humans and nature lived in balance, where people cared for the earth as much as they cared for each other. The young person who had begun to listen stayed close, asking questions and learning. They wanted to help spread the elders' message. They knew it would not be easy to make the village or the world change their ways, but they believed it was important to try. And so, while many still ignored the warnings, a quiet hope grew in the village. A hope that maybe, just maybe, people could learn to be unstoppable in a good way, using their power not to harm but to heal and protect. The elders understood the truth. Humans were unstoppable. They spoke with passion and care, even when no one else believed, because some truths they knew must always be told. The days in the village moved slowly, as they always had. The sun still rose behind the hills, the birds still sang, and the farmers still walked to their fields every morning. But something had changed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sudden. But the air felt different. The land felt a little more tired, the skies a little less blue. The river still flowed, but with less life than before. And yet most people went on as if everything was fine, but not everyone. One young villager had started listening closely to the elders. This person had grown up hearing their stories but never paid much attention. But lately something had shifted. After watching the land change and hearing the quiet concern in the elders' voices, this young villager started writing down what they heard. Every word, every sentence the elders spoke during their quiet gatherings was written into a small notebook. At first it was just for curiosity, but soon it became something more, a purpose. The elders had talked about balance, about nature, about how humans were growing faster than the earth could handle. They spoke about warnings from the past that had been ignored. They weren't trying to scare anyone. They just wanted people to understand, and the young villager believed them. One day, while walking past the old wooden meeting hall, the young villager stopped and sat on the steps outside. The elders were inside, speaking softly like always. The young villager pulled out their notebook and read through what they had written so far. Their hands trembled slightly. Something deep inside told them these words mattered. That evening, the young villager went home and typed everything into an old computer. It was slow, but it worked. The words flowed, just like they had been spoken by the elders. But now they were being saved, shared, made into something more than just whispers. Then came the day the mining trucks arrived. The sound of the engines echoed through the valley. Big machines rolled in from the highway carrying equipment, tools, and men in uniforms. They weren't there to visit. They had come to dig, cut, and take. The forest near the village was old. It had been there longer than anyone could remember. The trees stood tall, their roots deep in the earth. Birds, animals, and even the river depended on that forest. But now the land had been sold to a company planning to dig for minerals. Some villagers were excited. They believed this would bring jobs, money, and progress. This is the future, they said. We can't stay stuck in the past forever. The elders heard these words and grew silent. They had seen this coming, but now it was real. They met again in their small hall. This time their voices were stronger. They decided it was time to speak not just to the village, but to everyone. They asked to meet with the workers and company leaders. They stood in front of the village and told them what they knew. They spoke of the balance of nature, of what happens when land is hurt and not allowed to heal. They warned of water turning bad, of animals leaving, of sickness rising from the ground when it's disturbed too deeply. But the workers just looked confused. The company people nodded politely but seemed in a hurry. We have done this in many places, one of them said. It's safe. Everything is approved. The villagers watched quietly. Some felt unsure, caught between two sides. The elders with their deep knowledge, and the company with its promises. The young villager who had been writing down the elders' words decided to act. They uploaded the elders' message onto the internet. Simple videos, photos of the forest, and the notebook pages turned into short paragraphs that told the story clearly. It didn't go viral. But a few people from faraway places began to notice. A journalist messaged asking questions. A university student shared the video on their blog. Some people online began to say, maybe these elders know something we don't. Back in the village, the trucks began to cut trees. The sound was sharp. The air smelled of oil and fresh cut wood. Animals ran from the noise. The forest, once a safe home for so many lives, now echoed with machines. The elders gathered again. This time they didn't sit inside. They stood at the edge of the forest, holding hands, forming a quiet line. They didn't shout. They didn't fight. They just stood there as if trying to protect the trees with their presence alone. Some villagers joined them. Not many, but enough to matter. The young villager was there too, holding a handmade sign that read, "We belong to the earth, not the other way around." But the machines didn't stop. That night, the sky above the village felt heavy. Clouds moved in without warning. Lightning flashed in the distance. The elders sat by candlelight and prayed in their own way, not with words, but with silence, with listening, with hope. A few days later, something strange began to happen. The river, already weaker than before, turned murky and dark. Some children playing nearby complained of rashes on their skin. The villagers went to check their wells and found the water had a strange smell. Farmers reported crops failing suddenly. Green leaves turned brown overnight. The air carried a burnt smell, even though nothing had been burned. Birds flew overhead in chaotic patterns, some disappearing entirely. Fear started to grow. People who had ignored the elders before now looked to them with uncertain eyes. They remembered the warnings, the signs, the balance that had been broken, and still the machines kept working. The young villager took more photos, more videos, more notes. They began writing messages under each post. They warned us. We didn't listen. But it's not too late. People started sharing those messages more. Small news pages picked it up. A local newspaper wrote a story titled, "The Village That Tried to Warn the World." Back in the village, the elders met again. One of them, the quiet one who always watched the sky, stood and said, "This is just the beginning. If we can't stop this here, the world will feel it everywhere." The room fell silent. One of the younger villagers asked, "What can we do?" The elder answered slowly, "Speak, show. Tell the truth even if no one wants to hear it. That is our power. That has always been the power of humans. We speak, and when the truth is spoken enough times it begins to move others." And so they kept speaking, in front of the forest, in the village square, in videos, in drawings, in songs. Every message came from the same place, a deep love for the land, for life, for balance. Some people still laughed, some still turned away, but the words were growing. Like seeds, they had been planted, and somewhere out there, far beyond the village, they were starting to take root. Even if the machines didn't stop, even if the damage had already begun, the elders believed something important was happening. People were starting to listen, not many, but enough to give hope. And in the heart of it all stood the young villager, holding that same notebook, still writing, still sharing, still believing, because the elders had spoken. And even if no one had believed at first, their voices were now echoing far beyond the hills. The truth was out, and the story was far from over. The village was no longer the quiet place it once was. The forest near the edge had been cut down in places, the machines leaving scars in the earth that could not be hidden. The river ran darker, and the sky sometimes looked gray even when the sun was out. Yet, even in this time of change and worry, life carried on. People woke up, worked, and lived as best as they could. The elders, however, remained calm and focused. They met often, sometimes late into the night, speaking quietly about what must be done next. They knew the damage was real and growing, but they also believed that humans had a power beyond machines and money. It was the power to listen, to learn, and to change. The young villager who had begun to record their words was still at their side, but now they were not alone. Others from the village had started to listen more closely. Some came to the elders' meetings. Others helped by sharing stories online, talking to visitors, or writing letters to people in faraway cities. One afternoon, a group of villagers gathered in the village square. It was the first time in years that so many people had come together, not just to work or celebrate, but to talk about the future. The elders spoke plainly and clearly. They told the people what they had learned about the earth, the water, and the air. They reminded everyone that humans were strong, but only when they respected the world around them. A voice from the crowd spoke up. It was someone who had once doubted the elders. "We believed progress was always good," they said. "But now I see we may have been wrong. How do we fix what has been broken?" The elders smiled gently. "The first step is to understand that healing takes time. We must slow down, listen to the land, and work with it, not against it." Another person asked, "But the machines and companies keep coming. What can we do when the world outside wants to take everything faster than we can protect it?" An elder replied, "We cannot stop everything alone, but together our voices grow louder. We can ask for help, for laws that protect the land. We can teach others to care, not just for today, but for the generations to come." The villagers nodded. For some it was a new way of thinking. For others it was a return to old values they had forgotten. The young villagers stood quietly, holding their notebook close. They wanted to speak, but waited for the right moment. When they did, their voice was steady but full of hope. "I have been writing down everything the elders say because their words matter. We can share these words with the world, so more people understand. If we speak, they may listen." The crowd was silent for a moment, then quiet applause broke out. It was not a loud cheer, but a sign that something was changing inside the village. The elders encouraged the villagers to care for the small things. To plant trees where the forest had been lost. To clean the river bit by bit. To protect the birds and animals that still remained. They spoke of the future as a chance. Not a battle lost, but a path waiting to be made. Days later, the village came together to plant new trees. The land was hard and the work was slow, but people smiled as they dug holes and placed young saplings in the soil. Children laughed and helped water the small plants. The elders watched with quiet pride. It was a small step, but a powerful one. Meanwhile, the young villager sent messages to schools, universities, and environmental groups. Slowly, letters and emails came back with offers to visit, to help, to learn more. The village was no longer alone in its struggle. People from outside began to listen, and that brought new energy. The elders said this was just the beginning. Healing the earth would not happen overnight. It would take many seasons, many years, and many voices working together. But the first seed had been planted. At night, the village was quieter again. The stars shone bright and the wind carried the soft sounds of frogs and night birds. The elders sat together by a small fire, talking about the future with a calm strength. They knew that humans were unstoppable, but they hoped that this unstoppable power could now be guided by care, respect, and understanding. The young villager listened closely, feeling the weight of the responsibility but also the hope. The village had learned that speaking the truth mattered, that even when no one believed at first, truth had a way of growing strong, and so, the story of the village and the elders continued, not just as a warning, but as a promise that humans could be unstoppable not just in power but in kindness and care. The village had begun to change in ways no one could have predicted. The scars left by the machines were still there, but new green shoots were pushing through the earth. The river's water was clearer in some places, and small birds had started to return, their songs bringing life back to the quiet mornings. The villagers felt a quiet pride. They knew their work was far from done, but they were no longer alone or helpless. Slowly, the message of the elders was spreading beyond the hills and forests. One morning, a group of visitors arrived. They were not from the village or the nearby towns. They came with notebooks, cameras, and gentle questions. Scientists, teachers, and people who cared deeply about the earth had heard the story from afar. They wanted to see for themselves. The elders welcomed them with open arms. They shared their knowledge, their stories, and the simple truth that humans must live with the earth, not just on it. The visitors listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, and offered new ideas. The young villager, now more confident, showed them the notebook filled with the elders' words. It had grown thick with pages, a record of warnings and hopes, of pain and resilience. The visitors promised to help spread these stories, to teach others what they had learned from this small village. But even as hope grew, challenges remained. The company that had brought the machines still wanted to dig deeper, take more from the land. Their promises of progress and jobs still tempted many outside the village. The elders knew that change was never easy. Some people still believed the machines were the only way forward. Others feared what would happen if the work stopped completely. The village was caught between two worlds, one of rapid growth and one of careful healing. The elders called a meeting open to everyone. They wanted to speak honestly about the future. The village gathered once again in the square, where the air was filled with the scent of new plants and fresh earth. One elder spoke slowly, with kindness. We understand the desire to grow, to build a better life. But growth without care is not growth at all. It is destruction in disguise. A farmer from the crowd raised a hand. We want to protect the land, but we also need to feed our families. How do we do both? The elder nodded, understanding the worry. It is possible. We can farm the land in ways that help it heal. We can use water carefully, plant many kinds of crops, and work with the seasons, not against them. Others in the crowd shared their fears and hopes. Some spoke of the machines as a chance for a better life. Others spoke of the forest as their true home, something that must be saved. The young villager stepped forward again. We can find ways to live that do not destroy. We have begun to learn, and with your help, we can teach others too. The crowd grew quiet, then slowly people began to nod. Not everyone agreed, but many wanted to try. The elders and villagers formed small groups to work on different projects. Some focused on planting trees and protecting the river. Others worked on teaching children about the land and how to care for it. The young villager helped create simple guides and shared them online. One group began to build a small community center where people could meet, learn, and share stories. It was a place to celebrate both the old ways and the new ideas. The center became a gathering spot where the village's past and future could meet. As the seasons passed, the village saw small miracles. Bees returned, buzzing among the flowers. The river once again supported fish, and the fields grew crops stronger than before. People began to see that healing was real and possible, but the world outside the village was still changing fast. The news spoke of cities growing taller, machines faster, and more people moving to live in places far from the earth. The elders worried that many still did not understand the true cost of such progress. One night, as the stars filled the sky, the elders gathered for a special meeting. They spoke softly about the power humans held. "We are unstoppable," one said. "But what we choose to do with that power will decide the fate of all living things." The young villager listened closely. They felt the weight of these words, but also the strength behind them. They knew the journey was far from over. The elders reminded everyone that speaking the truth, sharing knowledge, and caring deeply were their greatest tools. They urged the village to keep telling their story, not just for themselves but for the whole world. In the days that followed, the village sent letters, messages, and videos far and wide. They connected with other villages, towns, and even cities. People began to listen more, to ask questions, and to think about their own relationship with the earth. The elders believed this was the start of a larger change. Not just in their village, but everywhere. The unstoppable power of humans could be a force for good, if only people chose to listen and act with care. The young villager continued to write and share. Their notebook had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that even when no one believed at first, truth has a way of growing stronger. The village was no longer just a place on a map. It had become a story of struggle, hope, and the deep connection between people and the earth. And as the sun rose each day, the villagers woke with a quiet promise in their hearts, to be unstoppable not in taking but in giving back. The village had come a long way since the first machines arrived. The forest was slowly healing, and the river's clear water once again flowed gently past the homes. But the journey was far from over. The elders and the villagers knew that lasting change took time, much longer than anyone might hope. Still, they believed in their power to protect the land, to listen to its needs, and to speak the truth no matter what. The young villager, once shy and unsure, had become a quiet leader. Their notebook was now filled with stories, lessons, and the voices of many people who had joined the cause. They often thought about how one person's choice to listen could grow into something much bigger, a movement of care and hope. One morning, a new challenge arrived. A group of officials came from the distant city. They wore suits and carried papers that said the company was allowed to dig more land nearby. They said the village had to let the machines continue if they wanted progress. They spoke quickly, trying to convince the villagers that the digging was safe and would bring new jobs. The villagers gathered in the square, their faces serious and full of worry. The elders listened quietly but did not speak right away. The young villager stepped forward and said softly, "We have seen what happens when the earth is not cared for. We have seen the river turn dark and the crops fail. We want to protect this home, for ourselves, for the animals, for the children yet to be born." The officials nodded but seemed tired of hearing no. "Progress cannot stop," one said firmly. "The world moves forward and so must you." The elder spoke then with a voice calm but strong. "Progress is not only machines and digging. True progress is when humans live in balance with the earth, when we care for what gives us life, not just take without thought." The officials looked at one another, unsure how to reply. Some villagers whispered about what to do. The young villager thought about all the stories they had collected, the warnings, the hopes, the work to heal the land. They spoke again. "We ask for time to show you that there is another way, a way where the land, the people, and the future can all thrive together." The officials agreed to leave and think about what they had heard. It was not a victory, but it was a start. The elders and villagers returned to their work with a renewed sense of purpose. They planted more trees, cleaned the river, and taught the children to love and protect the earth. The community center became a place for learning and sharing, where stories from the past met ideas for the future. One afternoon, the young villager sat by the riverbank, watching the water flow over smooth stones. A child came to sit beside them, eyes wide with curiosity. "Why do you write so much?" the child asked. The young villager smiled. "Because stories matter. They help us remember where we come from and guide us to where we need to go. When we share these stories, more people listen and learn. The child nodded slowly. I want to help too. Everyone can help, the young villager said. It starts with listening. As months passed, visitors continued to come. Some brought seeds from faraway places to plant. Others brought books and ideas about farming gently and caring for nature. The village grew stronger, not just in numbers but in spirit. News of the village spread wider. People in cities and towns began to ask questions about how they could live better with the earth. The elders' simple message, humans are unstoppable but only if they choose kindness and care, resonated with many. One day, a teacher from a distant school visited. She asked the young villager to speak to her students through a video call. The young villager shared the stories from the notebook, the lessons learned, and the hope for a better future. Afterward, messages poured in from children and teachers, thanking the village for sharing their truth. Some said they would plant trees in their own neighborhoods. Others promised to protect the rivers and animals near their homes. The young villager felt a deep joy. They understood now that one voice, when joined by others, could change the world. The elders gathered once more under the stars, sharing quiet words and gentle smiles. They knew challenges would come again. There were always more machines, more demands, more dangers. But they also knew that humans had the greatest power of all, the power to speak truth, to care deeply, and to keep moving forward. And so, the village continued. With every tree planted, every story shared, and every hand joined together, the future grew brighter. The elders' truth had been heard. Humans were unstoppable, not because they could take endlessly, but because they could choose to protect, heal, and hope. The story was not just theirs anymore. It belonged to everyone who believed that the earth was worth fighting for, and that belief was the strongest power of all.